Mhm.
Yeah. All right. So, Asma, thank you so much for joining me today to talk a little bit about your nomination. Oh, not nomination, your receiving of the Rhodes Scholarship. It's such amazing news. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate you taking the time out to speak with me.
Of course. And it's now been a week, so we gave you a little bit of time to let it set in. So, how are you feeling now? Like, what are you feeling a week later?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that a week would help temper both the excitement and the nerves and just the sheer amount of emotion that's difficult to sift through. But if anything, the week has allowed for different individuals to reach out to me to relay the significance of this moment to them specifically. And I've realized that it means many different things to me, but it also means many different things to many different members of the communities that I'm a part of. So to be at the intersection of all of that, again, is both very exciting and very overwhelming, and a week has actually elucidated like the full extent of that, so the full extent of what this moment means, and I'm still being made privy to it every day. So I think as the days goes on, it actually feels like a larger thing as opposed to what it felt like a week ago, which I'm grateful for sure and certain.
So, what does this mean to you then?
Yeah. To me, to start, I think what it means most saliently is that who I am as Asma, the many different facets of who I am. So I think everyone's identity is multifaceted, whether it's your cultural identity, your religious identity, your educational identity, and also the very specific idiosyncrasies that make you who you are. They all coalesce into making you this distinct individual. And I think oftentimes we feel that in order to vie for the most competitive opportunities in the world, we need to be more than what we are, or we need to streamline who we are in order to make it, I guess, closer to this ideal of perfection that we think we need to be in order to get these opportunities. So for me, winning the Rhodes means that I can do good for the world as I am, and I can serve the people that I want to serve and the causes that I want to serve as wholly myself. So showing up to something like this as my whole self, vulnerable and messy as that is, and having it garner this result in turn, it's not validation because I think I've always felt validated in my identity, but it's recognition that these values that often get lost in the blare of headlines, more specifically in the context of my own cultural identity, one facet of who I am, that these values can be recognized within the context of something as important and as hallowed as the Rhodes Scholarship.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's an incredible honor and affirmation of what you've been able to achieve and the focus you've been able to set. And so I guess you mentioned, kind of having all these different, I don't want to imply the word pressure, but I think it is a little bit, when you talk about what this means to other people, other identity groups or family members or um, you know professors, things like that. So do you feel balanced kind of moving forward in that way, or do you feel a little tug in one direction that you kind of gotta do something for a certain group or
Yeah, yeah. Um, I appreciate you asking that question because it's a question that's run through the entirety of my life. I think when you're the first in multiple senses of the word, even when you're the first in one sense of the word, there's such a pressure and as well as a yearning to be seen. And so that not only you're seen, but that the community that you come from is seen as well. And you feel like you're shouldering this obligation yourself. And so throughout my whole life, I've been preoccupied by and very deliberate with carving out space for individuality within the various different larger ideals or larger experiences that I represent. So I wish that I could say I've gotten to a point definitively where I know who I am as an individual within the context of the many different things that I do and the many different things that I represent and hope to further. Um, but I think it's still something that I struggle with, but it's that struggle. It's the striving and the working and deliberately seeking out battles that you know you don't have very high odds of winning, but feeling like the striving and the yearning and the working towards achieving them, feeling that that's when you're most alive, when you're believing in something and working towards it. That's been very formative in everything that I am and everything that I hope to be. So there is pressure. There has always been pressure. And it's heavy, but there's also tremendous good that comes out of it. And I think I owe a great deal of who I am and what I've done to it.
well, I think you just being able to recognize and acknowledge that and then set it aside even as you move on puts you light years ahead of, where you could potentially be in this moment, because it is such a tremendous honor that you've been able to attain for yourself. So I just can't stop wanting to congratulate you on that, and, just let you know just how impressed we all are with, you know, everything that you're setting out to do. So for a moment, if we could just kind of take it all the way back, you're here at Southern, and that really means something, I think, to people that are receiving this news. First of you winning the Truman Scholarship, and now the Rhodes Scholarship. So the fact that you were able to kind of come to a state school and find the opportunities that you needed to start this work is, I think, a huge affirmation for other people that find themselves in certain situations. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing, how did you find yourself at Southern?
Yeah. And I think when I've asked this question to other people too, an answer that I often hear, and it's my own answer as well, is that I didn't expect to be at Southern. And the way that things sort of played out, I applied to Southern, I believe it was May of my senior year of high school. And I enrolled a couple of weeks later, and I had no idea what to expect. Um, and I think many of our students find themselves at Southern one way or another, due to a myriad of life circumstances. But Southern has given me so very much. And it would take me, I think, the entirety of our time to express just what I mean by that. But perhaps if I had to encapsulate all of that within a singular sentiment, it would be that Southern it puts you in a position where you're very deliberate about who you are and what you do and the work that you want to do and the connections that you forge. Whereas at bigger institutions, and there are brilliant minds everywhere, there are brilliant minds at Southern, there are brilliant minds at Yale, 3 miles away from us. But I think what our institution does really well is that students who want to achieve really big things, and many of our students do, there are individual faculty members who ensure that your life circumstances don't impede your ability to dream or your ability to fulfill your dreams. But in addition to that, you become very deliberate about cultivating your voice. So, by way of not having the same infrastructure in place that other institutions might have, and by way of creating that infrastructure myself with the support of my faculty members, I've really had to think about, why do I want this? And who are the people that I'm connected to? And how am I going to get from point A to point B if that isn't clearly delineated? And yes, it is more difficult in certain respects, but in other respects, when you don't have the path clearly delineated for you and you have to do that yourself, you're so much more conscious about every single step that you're taking, and you have connections to help you get there. So I think Southern is all encompassing in that way. And it also allows for you to really think about who you are and what you want within the context of becoming, in a way that other institutions, I don't think, would have enabled me to grow in quite the same way.
When you put it that way, it's almost, you can kind of see the metaphor or the analogy for kind of the American dream. It's like we kind of have that little microcosm here of just, it's a place that you can come and just figure out kind of who you are and where you're meant to go. And a lot of that burden, you're right, it does kind of come back to you, to figure that out. So you have. So has there been like a pivotal experience at Southern that kind of set you on this path during your education, or is it something you came in knowing?
I think it's both. I mean, to start, I've been journaling my whole life. So even before I could write incomplete sentences, I've just been writing. And most of my writing involves my feelings about the world and my thoughts about the world. And so I've chronicled this from the time I was like 4 up until now. And I was going through those journals recently, and I noticed in between the lines that, as I've alluded to earlier in this discussion, and as I've told other people as well, there is such a yearning, explicitly related, but also between the lines, to become someone of importance, but not purely for the sake of being someone of importance, but for the sake of being someone who can help the communities that they come from, and for the sake of being someone who can enable the rest of the community to be seen. So I've always had that yearning, but it hasn't. I think it's taken different forms throughout my life. Like, I wanted to be a doctor at one point in my life, and then I wanted to be a journalist, and I wanted to be an engineer, and then I wanted to be a novelist, and so many different things. And at Southern, it materialized across my 3.5 years thus far. But I don't know if I would say that the catalyst has been one concrete moment, even though I've had those. But I would say if I had to define what are the specific instances that made me feel like Southern is where I'm going to achieve some of this yearning or fulfill some of this yearning, it would actually be those moments when I'm talking with a friend and we're walking across campus and we're talking about some really interesting philosophical or political idea. And we end up on the complete other end of campus because we're so engrossed in conversation. Or those moments where I walk into a professor's office and they make me a cup of green tea and we talk about the nuances of my essay, and then that branches off to something else 4 hours later. So it's moments like that where I felt that this is an institution that appreciates me for what I am, and that enables me to have spaces where I can be seen as what I am and heard for what I am, and really nurtured in that respect, like on a one-to-one basis. So I think that one-to-one relationship that I've been able to cultivate with so many people has been very helpful.
So is there one class or professor that particularly stands out in that hindsight?
It is so tough to pinpoint because I'm a part of 3 different departments. So I'm getting a bachelor's of science in political science, a bachelor's of arts in philosophy, and then a minor in English. And all of the professors in each one of those departments have been incredibly formative in my experience. But if I had to pinpoint one person who has kind of helped me put all of this together, Dr. Patricia Olney is my academic advisor. So I met her my sophomore year, and this was before I had even declared political science as my major, let alone philosophy and English. And I often go into her office and spend 3 or 4 hours in there, not only talking about academics, but talking about life. And she'll email me some of the most profound wisdom that I've ever been exposed to. I mean, she's such a wellspring of wisdom, but also even beyond that, she's such a wellspring of kindness. And I think when you have role models to look up to who are brilliant academically, and who are very wise as a result of the experiences they've been through in life, but are just so unabashedly kind, it reminds you that you can embody the intersection of all of these different attributes as well. So I think she was the first person who really not only validated my academic interest, but also saw me as Asma and nurtured that.
So is Dr. Olney the one that connected you with the Truman and Rhodes scholarships? Or
So the Truman Scholarship, it was Dr. Butterbaugh actually, who ran into me in the hallway. I was walking to a political theory class, and he said, "You should think about applying for the Truman." And this was a couple of months before. And I had heard about the Truman, but I hadn't really thought about applying for it before. So Dr. Marcia Shapiro, who has also been incredibly helpful, she's our liaison with the Truman Foundation at Southern. So she was very helpful in facilitating all of that. She coordinated all of it. And then Dr. Olney wrote one of my letters of recommendation. But the Rhodes, actually, we did not have a Rhodes liaison at Southern. To my knowledge, we haven't had anyone apply for it in recent history. I don't know if we've had anyone apply for it at all, but there wasn't really an infrastructure there. So I actually emailed Dr. Butterbaugh over the summer saying, "Hey, I'm interested in applying for the Rhodes. What do I do next?" And so with his help, Dr. Olney, Dr. Marcia Shapiro, and the other people who wrote a total of 8 letters of recommendation, we created the infrastructure and then worked within it. But yeah, it started with me kind of digging my heels in and saying, I want to do this. And then it materialized.
that's incredible.
Yeah, thanks.
How are your parents feeling right now?
Um, so many emotions. And yeah, I mean, it's a moment that I've been working towards my whole life, to see that pride expressed on their face in light of the tremendous sacrifice that they've experienced. And my parents have seen both life and death juxtaposed in a very visceral way by way of being an Afghan civilian during wartime. And then later here, my dad is a physician, and so he gets to confront life and death in its most visceral form every day. But it gives him an appreciation for what human beings are capable of. And because of that, both of my parents have an optimism that not even the darkest of moments in history or in politics can blunt. So they've always nurtured within me a desire to serve, and also a desire to make the most of what my own people have been through. And so to see that generational legacy of loss, but also hope despite the loss, and hope being forged at the very edge of just tragedy, but also triumph and overcoming that tragedy, to see all of that coalesce in this one moment, with me being able to achieve this, is really ironically, despite my chronicling of all of my emotions through words, it's, I think, the one moment that I find hardest to explain coherently. Yeah.
This kind of helps me understand how you manage to stay so busy, because you're involved in a lot of things at Southern, and you don't strike me as somebody that, sleeps a lot. You seem like you're always on the go.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about some of your involvements at Southern?
Yeah,
You-
yeah. And I mean, to preface this, you're right. I don't really get much sleep, but I often think that I wake up early, but my dad is usually awake before me. So my dad wakes up at 4, and sometimes I'll wake up at 5 or 4:30, and my dad will already be awake, and he'll make me a cup of coffee with cardamom and honey and a like couple of spoonfuls of creamer, and he'll put it on my desk, and he'll say, "Keep at it," like my future politician or a future world shaker or idealist with a pure heart, many different nicknames that I have. And that's what keeps me going. And it's interesting that you bring up involvement because I'm actually a very staunch introvert. And so
Hmm.
I'm perpetually stepping outside of my comfort zone when my tendency, I think, is to retreat in some deserted library somewhere, but I'm constantly out there doing things. And my involvement has felt very organic. I don't think I ever set out to be like a leader in the sense of like, okay, I can delineate it within a resume. But I just felt very compelled, for instance, to advocate for immigrant rights and refugee rights. So much of the work that I've done within the Muslim Student Association has pertained to advocating for refugees and immigrants. And I take that work into my experiences as a tutor. So I work with primarily bilingual students, just because I've been able to build a rapport with our bilingual community. And it's immensely gratifying to see students find their voices within the cadence of English grammar and English syntax. I'm also involved with student government, the pre-law journal, our multicultural board, our interfaith board, and a couple of other various different aspects of campus. But I think what ties them all together is my interest in academic pursuits and academic excellence and helping other people achieve that. But also, I know that my identity is multifaceted and I can serve the ways by which it is multifaceted. And so I hope by showing up as my whole self and advocating for the people that I know most closely, I can also in turn advocate for the people that I don't know and people who are different than me, but who also show up as their whole selves within these contexts, whether it be SGA, the tutoring center, our pre-law society, whatever it might be.
So your determination is clear. Your perseverance is strong. Has there ever been a moment where you just kind of thought, this is a lot. Maybe I do just kind of want to retreat and, go a different way, or
Hmm.
what's kind of kept you? Well, I guess it's a two-part question then. So has there been a time when you kind of wondered if it was all too much? And then what kind of motivates you to kind of push through moments like that?
Yeah, I mean, great questions. And as I mentioned earlier, despite being an introvert, and so despite having a strong tendency to want to retreat very often, um, I also have a certain kind of stubbornness. I think I'm very stubborn about believing in myself, even when I might not feel like that's the most logical decision, or stubborn about believing in the causes that I work for, even if all the odds are stacked against those causes, which in the case of international development and Afghanistan more specifically, but international development more broadly, there are many reasons to become disillusioned. But I'm stubborn about maintaining my hope, and I have always been that way. And I think that stubborn hope in the face of odds, maybe sometimes even illogical hope, is what keeps me going. But yes, there are certainly moments where I do feel overwhelmed, and it's important to have spaces where you can break and not be your composed self all the time, and to have people who see you for that and who understand that you breaking in that one moment doesn't detract from the work that you do or doesn't detract from your strength, but actually adds to it because it allows for you to keep going. But cultivating my voice took me a very long time. And there was a point earlier in my life when I was in middle school and early in high school where I wanted nothing more than to be invisible, even though I had such passion inside, but I was very self conscious about the ways that I was hypervisible. So I folded into myself. But it wasn't until I realized that having a voice is an immense privilege that many people from my heritage do not have not had. So I have to cultivate this voice to speak up on their behalf, or perhaps not on their behalf, but to create a platform for them to be heard as well. But it's very deliberate, and it's important to have spaces where you can break, but also spaces that remind you of the importance of continuing.
So you've mentioned Afghanistan a couple of times now, and I know in some other interviews you've mentioned that's ultimately where you see yourself kind of making the most impact. So do you kind of, I know it's early and you still have a lot to do before then, but do you kind of have some ideas about how you're going to take the work that you've already accomplished and the experience you have and the experiences you're about to have and move them into that space, especially looking at
Mhm.
everything that's just going on in the world right now?
Yeah, yeah. As you mentioned, I'm still kind of trying to piece together what it is exactly that I want to do in the world. And then that uncertainty is compounded by the fact that the political situation in Afghanistan is very volatile. So we don't even know what it will look like next week, let alone when I'm done with my education. But what I feel very strongly about within the Afghan context and also within other contexts that I've studied is the rebuilding of every country should be helmed by people who are familiar with the nuances of that culture. So I think in Afghanistan, having the next generation of law students who are familiar with the culture of their society, but also the legal ordinances and the legal norms that the country has established, they're situated in a very unique position to be able to reinforce the rule of law and in turn bolster the legitimacy of their government, which has effects in every sector of society. So I would like to help support Afghan law students. I hope to become a law student one day myself after attaining my master's degrees. And so I think using the education that I've received, I've been very fortunate to receive and will receive at institutions that are at the cutting edge of research for international development. I'd like to support the next generation or my generation of Afghan born, Afghan raised lawyers. But I'd also like to do my part in litigating there and supporting refugee and immigrant communities here because peace building and resettlement transcends borders. And I already know the challenges that refugees and immigrants go through in the United States. So, doing, I think, that two pronged approach, helping refugees here and immigrants here, but also helping rebuild the nation there, will allow for me to have a nuanced and multifaceted impact.
So, final question.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for other Southern students that maybe, are feeling a little bit inspired and, kind of maybe getting that little tickle that maybe there's a little bit more that they could be doing?
Yeah. Um, I think I would want to start this advice with the stubborn hope that I alluded to. So sometimes it might feel like believing in yourself and believing in your dreams and believing in the place that you find yourself is an illogical thing to do. Most often it's not, even when it feels like it. But even if it does feel like it, I think we need to reach very deeply within ourselves. And I think we need to find a source by which we can continue that belief even when it feels like it is an illogical thing to do. And then once we do that, we're able to give all of our heart to the rest of the world. And that is a hard thing to do. It is a hard thing to put your heart into your work, to put your heart into the way that you speak to other people, and to put your heart into your dreams and cultivating them. It's a scary thing to do. It puts you in a vulnerable position. But if you continue to do that, you'll get the most out of your opportunities in your education, for sure and certain. But you'll also get the most out of these 4 formative years in your development. So I think turning inwards is always the best place to start and find out what is it that keeps you going on those nights where you really want to sleep, but you stay awake to read that one extra chapter, or you wake up really early to head to that student government meeting, even if you haven't gotten much sleep that entire week. What is it that allows for you to do that and really foreground that and make that the wellspring of your hope and the source by which you gain the strength to show up as yourself and to pour your heart into your work, even if it puts you in a precarious situation.
So, practically speaking, chamomile tea and journaling to start.
Yes, practically speaking, a lot of tea, a lot of journaling, and people that you can cry in front of because that's always necessary.
Well, I think that's great advice, and I think I might take it myself. So, Asma, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me today and to share your story with your fellow Southern students and faculty and staff. And we're all rooting for you. And please make sure you come back and tell us how you're doing and share this amazing experience. Let us live vicariously through you.
No, thank you so much, Allison, for being as thoughtful as you were. I really appreciated speaking to you, and I'm excited for what the future has in store.